Social Music Talk. Hi, welcome to Social Music Talk for PlaylistResearch.com. I'm Alex Cosper, and with me a special guest, Jeff Songster from the radio industry and also the tech industry and other industries. But we'll talk about radio today and Jeff's association with a radio legend named Dr. Don Rose. And Dr. Don Rose was on KFRC back in the 70s, from 1973 to 1986.
I brought my radio, Alex. I got my radio right here.
Cool. Looks cool, Jeff. And so Dr. Don was the morning guy that everyone listened to, not just in San Francisco, but Northern California, like Sacramento. That's where I grew up. And I guess, Jeff, you were in the Bay when you listened to Dr. Don, right?
Oh yeah, I grew up in Concord. I was there, from when I was a little tiny guy on up. Born in Albany, so I've been around the Bay all my life. But except when I knew you, when we both went to school up at Sac State, and you were at the station up there already, and I came along later. But I've been a San Francisco Bay Area kid all my life.
Do you remember as far back as, say, like the freeform era of San Francisco stations like KSAN and those kind of stations?
Oh, all of them. Yeah, K101 when they first invented stereo and all that fun stuff, and album rock.
Right.
The notion of just playing an album. It was a lot of fun to grow up in that scene. And the music scene there was amazing. What for me was a turning point. When I was a little tiny guy, my grandmother gave me a little cube Sony AM radio.
Wow.
And I was probably 4 or 5 years old when I got that for one of my birthdays. And so I would explore the AM dial with that thing. And of course I found, KFRC, the big 610, with all the guys. In fact, do you still know Dave Sholin, who you used to work with?
Yes. I actually interviewed Dave Sholin some years ago, like 5 or 6 years ago, and it's on my website, Playlist Research.
Did he tell you back then he was called the Duke?
Yes.
I bet he did.
Well known in the radio industry.
Yeah, the Duke Dave Sholin. I grew up listening to him, Big Tom Parker, all these guys that were the huge names on KFRC. So I always wanted to meet Dr. Don, and eventually I did. He was doing an appearance at Pacific Stereo in Walnut Creek, and my dad, being from the same hometown as Don was, I said, "Hey, Dad, can you take me to this? You'll get to meet Dr. Don. He's from your hometown, Hastings, Nebraska." Dad said, "Sure." So we went down there. And the two of them hit it off like old friends. They were just chit-chatting for 10 minutes in front of everybody who was waiting for autographs and all that stuff. And so they had a great time catching up on Hastings, And so I had a great time, too, because I got to see Don and meet Don. And it wasn't until, I don't know, probably a decade later before I got back to him again as an employee of the station that he had taken over with
That's right. I want to talk with you about that. But first, let's talk about how you got into radio. And like you mentioned earlier, it was through Sac State. So what brought you from the Bay Area to Sac State in the first place?
Well, probably grades as much as anything, because I needed to get grades better than that to go anywhere. CSU system took me in. I'm grateful to be a CSU grad, And before that, it was Diablo Valley College, community college, where you repair all your high school grades if you've gotten any that aren't quite perfect. So I did that. Did 55 units at the community college, and then ended up applying to Sac State. And I loved the broadcast program they had there in their communications department. Professor Walters and a few others were really great folks. And I got an A in Walters' class. That was.
I got an A in that class.
Yeah,
too, even though I slept through it.
we were like a Socratic dialectic in that class, he and I, and the rest of the students were looking at us like, what's with these two? They couldn't follow it. They were like, what? And so he gave.
He was the key. He was the key to both of us getting jobs in the real world, in the radio industry.
Yeah,
we had our choice to like 5 different stations. I picked Quad, and you picked Quad.
I did. I interviewed at Channel 31, the TV station. Which I don't know whether I would have done okay there or not. And I think I interviewed at KSAN as well, but I'm not sure. But not KSAN. It was what was the other one up there? Anyway, I ended up at Quad because that interview went just as well or better with Tom, and so I went to work for Tom Chase and you guys all over there. at Ed Stolz's station, you know,
Yeah.
the Hot
And you
FM.
wound up on the air on the weekend.
The Hot FM, yeah. I mean, I was. You were hotter than I was back then. You were on the air a lot more than I was.
I was the assistant music director at that time, and
Yeah.
eventually became program director. But I just stayed close to it. You know, I lived there at the radio station.
I remember. Well, all of us did at some level. When you were
Yeah.
working it, you pretty much wanted to be around because that was
Yeah.
the only way to get those free dinners off of Linda and other people. You know, I mean, how many dinners did we have over at the different pasta places and everything
Right.
else?
And how many parties did we host together doing mobile DJ gigs through the
Dozens, man.
station? People
Dozens
would call
at
the
least.
station asking for DJs, and they'd wind up with us.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Remember the time we sent echoes all over Placerville's Valley up there because we were playing the top of the parking garage in that town. Oh man, it was just bouncing off the canyons in all directions. They had to tell
We did
us
a lot of
to
those
down.
outer limits type places in the outskirts of Sacramento.
Right. A lot of fun.
So then you wound up back in the Bay Area, and then you wound up working for Dr. Don. So let's talk about that. At KKI.
Yeah. One night I was having a dinner. At
First, let's talk about how he had been at KFRC but left in 1986.
Right.
And then in 1987, the following year, he wound up running KKIS.
The corporate leaders of KFRC must have had some weird kind of indigestion that caused them to change formats. And as you know, in radio, that's the death knell for most of the talent that's been hired and works there. Even if they build a great reputation like he and Lee Baby Sims and all these people have done along the way, that, you know, it just blows up on you when the station changes format. So
FM was taking over, and that's why I think KFRC 610 AM changed to like big bands, is because Top 40 was no longer happening on AM. So that's why it shifted to FM.
But they had even tried, I believe, KFRC on the FM side for a while, simulcasting and stuff. And it just wasn't going because the other stations were hipper and cooler, you know, like Kits Live 105 and, you know, and Camel 106 and all the old ones that were really hopping at that time. But and the format had just gotten a little. Boss Jockin was no longer the cool.
It was rusty.
Thing it was. Yeah, it was getting a little rusty from you know, when we worked with the Steel Man, Terry Steele, and you know, and like I said, the Duke Dave Show, all those big Boss Jockin names that those guys had. Our boss Tom Chase at the time, you know, the action. You had to have an action name, you know, a name that had an action in it. But so I went from a dinner at Fuddruckers right there in the mall that I was at in Walnut Creek, Concord area there it was the Willows. It's actually in Concord, sort of right on the edge. But anyway, so I'm having dinner there. I get done. I walk out across the parking lot and I see a guy walking out of KKIS, the station. And I just hollered to him. I said, "Hey, how's the guy get a job at that place?" And he smiles at me. He goes, "Come see me tomorrow." So he gave me a time, and I came back, and that was RJ Paramon of KGO Radio and KKIS fame. He had done quite a long time there, had a good career there going on, and he interviewed me. And as he went to interview me, as I walked in the office, I had been a bit of a Macintosh computer nerd in those days. I saw a Mac sitting on his desk, and I said, "Oh, you got a Mac? Oh, that's cool." And he goes, "You know how to use that thing?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You're hired." So I ended up helping him with that.
Right, 1987. Not too many people had home computers yet.
Right. Well, and the Mac was only 3 years old at that point. You know, it hadn't been out to that one. It was still one of the little cute robot head style ones, you know, 9-inch screen and all that. But so he needed somebody to help him with that because Dr. Don Rose had just joined the station, was part of the ownership, along with Jim Chabin, and the Chabin brothers were there doing their thing. They were going to do a partnership and try to make a new, bigger, you know, station in the Bay Area, bring back the glory days of pop radio. And as it turns out, so his son, David Rosenberg, was doing a really nice job of trying to automate some big, you know, CD jukeboxes that we had using a little Macintosh program. And that was all a project they were working on. So I fit in because as a disc jockey, air personality, I could also, you know, I could do some shifts and I could help out with, you know, doing some of the work on the computer system that they were working on. So so that was a nice, you know, mesh of the talents and got me into the place. And it didn't take long before I got lucky. One of the other guys had a drinking problem that was doing a daytime shift, and and I ended up with a daytime shift that I could do.
All right.
And I started getting noticed.
Was it a regular shift?
No, just fill in for a while, and then I did the regular shift I had was overnights 2 to 6, and the cool thing about that was I was the lead-in to Don's show. So in the morning he would talk about me because I was the lead-in to his show. I would talk to him a little bit here and there, and and so it worked pretty well. And he was a great guy. Don was just one of the best in the world.
Did you save any of those air checks?
I have to go through. I'm just in the process of moving house right now, and as soon as I'm done, I'll probably know the answer to that question. Because right now I know that there's at least 1 or 2 boxes in my old garage that I have to pull out and see what's on them, because I have a whole pile of air check tapes in there from the way back. So probably is the answer. But what condition they're in, I got to find a cassette deck with variable speed on it just so I can make sure it sounds okay, There
are air checks on YouTube that I've heard of, KKIS, which that was 990 AM, right?
Yes. 990 AM and 92.1 FM, yeah.
Okay. So
it was KISS. We were going by KISS FM, the Gull. With LA's KISS FM that had been going for years, we were going with KISS FM up there in the Bay Area, which was kind of cheeky.
And wasn't Dr. Don trying to buy the station?
He was. And in the end, the Chabin brothers decided they didn't want to sell, and so that whole deal fell apart. And as a result, he ended up going over to K101, and apparently, poor guy died of a heart attack some years later.
Yeah. Well, he had a heart attack on the air.
That'll shorten your career on the air.
That was 1988, and then he retired right then. And then he lived until 2005.
Yeah. I felt bad that he'd had that happen on the air. That must have been a hell of a trauma for everyone involved,
Now, he had lost his leg in an accident.
Right. He'd broken it a couple times in a hunting accident is what happened. He broke it more than once and then eventually just wouldn't heal. How sometimes if you've got a break that you've done multiple times, it just won't mend again. And that was what apparently happened, and he had to have it removed. That's the story. That's the story I remember vaguely. I'm not qualified to talk on his.
Now, you're the one who introduced me to Dr. Don. I remember the one time I came there, you introduced me to him, and he was really nice. It was really incredible meeting a legend of that stature,
Yeah.
But it just didn't last long. It only lasted like 6 months or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was. I was there a little longer than that, I think, but it was a tricky thing because the Chabin brothers had their idea what they wanted, and Don had his idea what he wanted. And at some point, I think he wanted bigger control of it, and they weren't giving it to him, so he made his own choice. I'm just glad that while I was there, I got to work with so many great people. I got to work with, like I said, Lee Baby Sims, who was on the air in New Orleans way back when, and a big radio legend himself, and Don Rose himself, and Ravi Paramount, all these great guys. And Bobby Cole was my boss for a while, who used to be in San Francisco radio, I think at 101. All these different people I got to work with. Ted Osregato is one of my buddies who I worked with for years. Our kids ended up in preschool together years later. And so he was Ted E on the radio, and he ended up working on Metro Traffic for quite a long time in the Bay Area on KQED and other things. He had different personas he used, but he was on. You could recognize his voice easily if you knew him. And so I got to work with lots of great people. I worked with you guys up in Sacramento. It was a blast. Yeah. Then watching your career take off and go where it went, it was a lot of fun. Right. This was a good career. It was a good. We hit it at this really odd time when satellites were coming in. Rick Dees.
It was kind of the best era for radio, kind of.
Yeah, the pre-Rick Dees, the what's his name, the other guy, that lewd, absurd guy, Howard Stern.
Stern.
Before those guys. And before satellite radio took over the whole thing,
and internet radio, which we're on right now, and
here we're
going to continue this interview. This is the end of the first segment, so thanks for discussing Dr. Don with us, Jeff Songster.
You betcha.
Social music.